are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
Because organizations grow, you find yourself doing more and more leading leaders and spending your time on that. And you get farther and farther away from sitting with people and actually making disciples of Jesus. And there is a hollowness you'll start to experience when you get too far from discipleship that is supposed to be there, because we're all called to make disciples at all seasons of our life. That's the mandate for all of us. It's a call for all of us. And I can't remember when that was, maybe early 2020, I think.
Yeah.
And honest to goodness, that was like the lifeblood for me. I took it really seriously, and both Trav and I did, and said we have to keep making disciples. And getting to walk with people and seeing the light bulb come on in their eyes with Jesus, seeing them turn from sin in their life and turn to Jesus, seeing this darkness to light stories, that was the thing that sustained me when everything else felt like it was just in shambles at times. It forced you to see in another person in a close proximity, no, God is doing something, and this is worth the effort, and I'll keep doing this forever if I get to keep seeing this happen in people's lives.
Wow.
Yeah, this changed us.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of Vineyard churches in the U.S., and to celebrate throughout the year, we'll be periodically sharing the stories of local Vineyard churches throughout the country. In today's episode, Super Regional Leader Joel Seymour chats with Travis and Jennica Conklin, who planted the Vine Church in Goshen, Indiana in 2014. Travis serves as the lead pastor, and Jennica is the discipleship and first impressions pastor. Let's listen in.
Well, hey, friends, my name's Joel Seymour. I serve as a super regional leader of Vineyard USA. Great, humble title that I have. And I am blessed today to be with Travis and Jennica Conklin, and they are from the Vine Church in Goshen, Indiana. And man, I'm glad that the three of us get to have a conversation. We've been in the same rooms over the last few years, quite, as you all are ALs, I was an AL, and then I was an RL, and we're just in different rooms. And then now I get to serve as your SRL and see you all more. And I don't know, do you remember the first time we really connected and spent quality time? Yeah, there's the laughter.
Yeah. We're in tight quarters.
Tight quarters. We're in Central California trying to fly home from a Multiply Vineyard event on a plane, and it's unseasonably cold, and we're on there forever. And I think all of us are looking at our watches. We had every one of us had tight connecting flights. And remember what the pilot comes on, it's like, hey, thanks for your patience. Unfortunately, due to temperatures, we need to have our plane de-iced, and we have one person at the airport who is licensed to de-ice planes, and he's off today, so we're waking him up or whatever, and he'll be here soon. And that was quite the experience. But hey, we got to hang out and get to know each other well, so that was kind of fun. Well, hey, I just want to, hear your story. I know some cool things are happening at your church, so we'll get to that. But why don't we just start? I don't know who wants to go first, or if you're going to just tag team, but would love just to hear, and maybe each just take a few minutes, maybe to tell each of your own story of just kind of, where you grew up, all those kind of things. In the movies they call it the origin story. So we want to hear Travis and Jennica's origin story. Where did these great people come from? So, whoever wants to jump in, just jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I grew up actually in a military family, coming out of a lot of brokenness, and so my early years we grew up in a non-Christian home. And so, growing up in that setting, we got to the point where my parents actually went to, funny enough, an Amway convention. And at the Amway convention, they had an altar call at one of the events, and they gave their life to Jesus. Yeah, so it was kind of a crazy thing. When they got home, they just shared kind of what they learned with me and my sister. And we both said, boy, I think we're in. And so, and honestly, it really was one of those, I came to Jesus and never looked back, because I think what we had come out of as a family and kind of what we had grown up in, we could really see that, this is not the life we want.
How old were you then?
So I was about 11 years old.
Wow.
So Yeah, when I was 11 years old. And then that kind of started a journey where we actually started out in a Pentecostal church, our very first church, decided that wasn't quite the fit we wanted. And so ended up in a non-denominational church, and then eventually transitioned into a Vineyard church. And so my best friend's dad actually pastored that church. And so as we kind of grew up together, me and my best friend hanging out all the time, that was kind of my first exposure to Vineyard early on. And and then that was kind of my journey. I got involved with leading worship and youth ministry and different things, and just kind of continued from there on into eventually planting a church. So that was a very abbreviated version of my origin story.
That's so good. I have a few questions. I mean, one of the things I think of as you're talking, Travis, so if I understood you right, like you had like zero faith background before 11, or your family just didn't go to church, that kind of thing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't know Jesus at all. I mean, we'd heard the name. That was about the extent of it. So I think my dad had grown up in a Presbyterian church, but that was about it. And so, no, we never went to church on Sundays. I think we got invited by grandma once or twice. That was about it.
Wow. And so your parents ended up going to an Amway convention to, make more money, have more time with their family, sell soap and vitamins or whatever, cleaning products, and they end up with Jesus. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I love it.
Story.
And we'll get to Jennica's story, but I am interested in, even as just that abbreviated version, how do you think that's like impacted how you minister and pastor now, of just like growing up in a family that didn't have faith and then experience radical transformation after having faith in Jesus?
Yeah, I think it's been helpful on a lot of levels, just to understand. I mean, I remember what it was like to not know Jesus and to live in a family that, I mean, things were hard, and, there was addiction and a lot of other stuff going on around us. I remember what that was like. And so, I was old enough to really see, that's not the life I want. So what that's done is, as I've, grown in my faith, being able to just relate to people that are kind of walking through some of that, and to truly understand, like to be able to say, hey, I know what you're walking through. I get it. And you don't have to live like that. It doesn't have to look like that for you. So, so that's been huge. I think just even in my heart, to be able to connect to, people really do need Jesus. We needed Jesus, and people really do need Jesus. So
I love that. So what I'm hearing is like you've been able to, it's given you a way to be able to relate to people, a way to connect, and just to have conversation, and a desire to, I mean, I don't have to tell you, there are some folks who get so deep into the Christian subculture, they either can't relate anymore, or sometimes lose the desire. And so what I'm hearing is like, you're actually motivated to connect with people who don't have faith in Jesus, just because you know what Jesus can do to a family, to a person, to an individual. Which is so cool. Yep. So good.
No, absolutely.
Well, I got more questions on that, and even how that relates to how y'all are doing church at the Vine. And it's the Vine, right? Not divine. It's the Vine.
Yeah, that's
right. So the Vine.
Despite popular opinion.
That's right. Despite popular opinion. Hey, if your church is divine, that's okay too.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But I don't want to get too far ahead, because I want to hear your story, Jennica. So I'd love to hear kind of where'd you grow up, and how'd you come to faith in Jesus, and and how'd you end up in ministry?
So I'm from Midwest Indiana, and we have a family of 8 kids. I'm in the middle. There's 4 girls and then 4 boys in that order. We always say that's the most organized thing my parents ever did. And my parents really got lit on fire for Jesus during the Jesus movement. And so I grew up, we were always like the last people to leave church, and, really a committed part of it. But when I was 12 years old, I attended a summer camp that had a moment with Jesus, and it was a really significant moment in my life at 12, and really committed my life to Jesus, and had a season in middle school where I was a little bit of a middle school missionary. I just forced all of my friends from from school to come with me to church, and got to see several of them come to Jesus, and just had a reckoning with him where I took it really seriously. And I was aware that he was calling me not later, but then. Grew up with a perspective where women were allowed to definitely lead things, but I was unclear on how I felt about the female pastor thing, but I did feel really called to ministry. So what my young mind did was said, well, then I need to marry somebody that is a youth pastor or a worship leader or something, which is kind of funny because I don't think that was, I was aware of that cognitively what I was doing, but I think I felt called to ministry myself, at a young age.
I hear that story from so many people too, so many women.
It's just fascinating.
That they felt a call, they had a desire to do ministry and to lead.
Don't quite know what to do with it.
Yeah. And so they begin to think, I'm going to have to be a pastor's wife to do this. And then so sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's subconscious, it sounds like with you. But yeah, I've heard that so much. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No. So Trav and I met when I was still pretty young, and we got married young. We were kind of one of those people that we decided, we knew it wasn't probably the right decision for everybody, but we would have more adventures in following Jesus together than we would alone. And that's been such a unifying thing in our marriage of just our commitment to being all in on ministry and doing whatever we can for the kingdom, and supporting one another in that. So that's been a beautiful thing for our marriage, a really unifying thing for our marriage. Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of the early journey. And then shortly after we got married, so Trav's from Montana and I'm from Indiana. We met out here while he was doing an internship at a church. Married him, tried to keep him here with me for a while, and he was missing his mountains pretty bad. Through a process of time, felt like God was asking us to go and help with some church plant in Montana. There's, of course, a big story behind it, but we ended up going out to a little church plant startup with, was there 10 people?
Wow.
They were meeting in the pastor's garage, and we moved across the country, broke as a joke, but really willing to, get involved. And so Trav was the worship leader there, and I helped on the sound system very poorly. And
sounds like church planting.
People, and it was all the things the best we could. And
we'd even break out those little space heater things and set it in the middle. We'd all be huddled around freezing, but it was great. Yeah.
That's so good.
A lot of fun.
And this is a Vineyard church plant out in Montana that you're part of at the time?
Yeah,
that's so good.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. And so, before we journey too far, I'm struck by the fact both of you have a testimony of kind of that preteen, right on the cusp of teenager, between 11 and 12. You both come to faith. I want to continue on the story and hate to interrupt here, but that did stand out to me of how has that kind of affected even how you look at ministry and church? And I imagine it's affected you as parents too. But I'd love to hear just a little bit before we continue on the church planting story. That stood out to me. Both of you have a testimony of about 11 or 12. You make a decision for Jesus.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just been a ever prevalent thing to look at teenagers or, tweens or, kids, even 7, 8, knowing that Jesus wants to use them and reach them now, and recognizing that that's when so many people make the decision to follow Jesus. It's such an important age to not wait around and just recognize how significant that is. So I think Trav and I are both pretty conscientious about being really intentional with as many kids as we can in that age. And, I don't know, we build as many relationships as we can with the teenagers in our church. And I just love them. And I'm excited to see what God's doing in many of them that are making a really conscious effort to follow Jesus now.
Yeah.
I think I'd also add to that. I think there's a dynamic in which sometimes we wait to get our kids involved in church. And I think that's been a huge thing for us as parents, but also because we've got 3 kids ourselves and, so we understand all the challenges that goes into that. But it's been huge to plug our kids in and then also invite other kids at a young age to be a part, to just plug in and serve in whatever capacity. So I think that has deeply affected not only their life, but it's been such a life-giving thing for the church too, because you get just all these young people serving in a lot of different ways, and they bring so much life to what's going on. So, yeah.
I remember being 8 or 9 and they let me run the projector screen, the old school projector screen at church for our hour-long worship times. But I felt so important that I had a role, that it wasn't just my parents' church, but it was my church, and I had a place. And I think that's so significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can look back through my life, and I'm not sitting where I'm sitting today, both ministry-wise, but also just as a human, just as a follower of Jesus and being formed the way I'm not here unless I had went to a church that did the same things with us. Like we served, we volunteered. I mean, I think I'm like 15 or 16, and it was a bigger church, so like their kind of junior worship kids church may have been 50 or 60 grade schoolers, and it was like its own little service. And I'm like 15 or 16, and the youth pastor brought me along, and eventually I was doing that, every other week. I was leading that service, leading worship, giving communion, teaching the lesson, praying with kids. And there is something about getting we all know the stats of, 85% of everybody who becomes followers of Jesus do so before they're 18. So we all know that. But we also just know how formative it can be to be engaged in the life of the church. And it's not just a hobby, it becomes a way of life, and people want to stick with it after they get out of high school. So,
and to just get them involved before they even can get in their head about knowing that they don't know what they're doing.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Before they know I don't actually have a clue what I'm doing. I probably shouldn't be allowed to do this. Get them in early before they recognize that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's transformative. I think the other thing that stood out to me in both of it, and this will get us up to speed on the story you all were telling, but is I was struck by that. I was struck by the both made decisions at middle school, and how that has set your life on a path. And then you mentioned that you got married young. How young were you when you got married?
Oh man, I was a straight up baby. I was 18.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was a little older, 23.
23, yeah. I mean, Christy and I, we got married when we were 20, and that's a different thing too. Both getting married when you're young, but also what I heard is you said something, Jennica, about we just thought it would be better to do this adventure with Jesus together more than apart. And so obviously if that happens for people, that's great. But I think what stood out for me is there's something about being a young adult and doing those kind of adventures that it's like that window only exists in that part of your life. Like right now you have 3 kids, true. You have, multiple responsibilities, you have a house, you have all these things. And if the Lord said, hey, I need you to go to Montana and be a part of a church plant in a garage, that would be a completely different thing to do and a lot harder than when you're, in your late teens, early 20s. So
yeah, it's huge.
You had freedom to follow the Lord's call in your life. So you're in this garage, you're doing worship leading, you guys are helping. Jennica turns into a sound person, and you're doing sound. And so tell us a little bit, what happens there, and then just kind of how do you end up, because now you're in Indiana, how do you bounce back to Jennica's homeland? So no, that's great. So we were serving in that church for a while, and we felt over about a 4-year period of time, our time had kind of come to an end, and we'd served there for a little while. And I had started insurance adjusting business. And so I thought, well, I probably, I'm going to go try to make some money for a minute. We're still pretty early in life. And so started to do that. And that seemed like a good idea. And then we found ourselves in another church plant, like immediately following this church plant. And through that season, we had a lot of relationship with the Montana Vineyard pastors and different people out there. And just people would say things like, well, have you guys thought about planting a church? And we're like, no, we wouldn't do that. And as we were doing our own thing for a minute, we started to really feel kind of empty in that. And we started realizing, I think this is good for the money, but it's bad for the long-term trajectory of our lives. And so just God started to use that. Plus, the other interesting thing, and God will do a number of different things to kind of get your attention, but a lot of our friends that were like really close quarter friends slowly started transitioning out of Montana and moving away just randomly. And it was like, well, this person got a job here, that person got a job here. And so we started looking around and saying our support system is leaving.
maybe we should pay attention to that. And so we just started praying about it because we were still involved in church. We were still serving in ministry areas, but God started speaking to us about planting a church. And I remember I was driving in the mountains of Montana. A big part of my job was to drive all over the place. And I just felt like he started speaking to me about, would you move back to Indiana and plant a church? Because I met Jennica in Indiana, and when I moved away, I'd said, I'll probably never move back here again.
Right.
And so
Classic
my first
line.
reaction, my first reaction, honestly, was just to say, no, Lord, I don't think I want to do that.
Yeah.
But he just wouldn't let it go. And so I, finally said, yeah, I think that's what we're supposed to do. So we got a hold of a pastor friend that we had served with in Indiana and said, hey, here's something we feel like the Lord is stirring in our hearts. We don't know what to do with it. But you've, been a pastor for a long time. Tell us, what does that look like? And he just told us, wow, that's really interesting. We are feeling like the Lord wants us to send 2 church planters out to Goshen, Indiana, and to Warsaw, Indiana. And we have the pastors for Warsaw, but we don't have the pastors for Goshen. The timing of this is really
exactly where we felt like the Lord had been telling us.
Oh,
we were
my
to go
goodness.
plant a church.
Wow. So cool.
Yeah.
One of those holy moments.
So
that just began a process.
And how long ago was that?
Yeah. So
Well,
that was,
it was about 2 years before we moved to Indiana, and we've been here 10 years.
Yeah.
So about 12 years ago. So we were we were a little smarter, like you mentioned, after you have kids and stuff, you don't just, I think initially when we thought we heard a word from the Lord, we were like, well, we have to do it, now, right now. And so we were able to take a couple years and be really committed to getting our finances in order so that we could afford to plant a church, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So we got completely out of debt, and we were able to put some money in savings, and thank God we did, because we thought we were moving to Indiana, and we wanted this, our previous pastor in Indiana. The goal was to kind of move back, and we had kind of a 2 to 5 year plan out there somewhere that, after a while of him just mentoring us and us attending and just being part of the church, that we would plant. But the Lord kind of sped up the process.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. So when we got out here, it was like ready, shoot, aim.
Right.
That's kind of how it felt. Where we got out here, and immediately it was like, wow, I think we're supposed to get started sooner than we thought. And so we'd go to coffee shops in Goshen, and we'd be sitting there, and I was meeting with a couple of church planters, and I was just picking their brain like, well, you guys started, what did you do? And as we're sitting there, we'd have people come over and be like, hey, Travis, how are you doing? Hey, you guys should plant a church, and they'd be like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
So it was kind of interactions like that just started telling us, okay, I think we need to get started sooner than 5 years. We don't get to wait that long. Yeah. So that's where that started. So we talked to our sending pastor and said, I think we're wanting to move forward faster. And he said, awesome, let's do it.
Wow.
So
there's a couple thoughts that both of you shared that I think so important, particularly for people who are wrestling with ministry or wrestling with just direction in life, and I think maybe more specifically for any young adults that might be listening. A couple things there. One is you said, Travis, like we were doing something, we realized we were kind of doing it for ourselves, as an insurance adjuster. And I could see where this is going to lead the trajectory of our life. And obviously, the Lord has followers of Jesus be insurance adjusters and have careers, and that's the right thing. But you were looking at your life differently in the sense of, is this thing, what I'm doing today, leading to the outcome I want? And what I feel like the Lord is leading me to. And so there could be somebody that has been called to be a school teacher, and that's the exact trajectory they should be on, and it's leading to the outcome the Lord has for them. But you just were wrestling, and you too were self-aware enough. Yeah. It sounds like sensitive to the Lord's prompting and the Holy Spirit enough to go, wait a second, if we keep on this track, it's not going to lead where the Lord wants. It'd be a good life, but it's not where the Lord would have. And so I just want to point that out for people who are listening.
I think the language around that I would even say that we were feeling was, will this result in moving God's kingdom forward? Mm-hmm. And for us, the answer was, if I go just be an insurance adjuster in my life, I probably won't be able to do that because I'll be disobedient to some of the things God's calling me to do. But for the average person, God's got something specific that he's called them to do.
Right.
And it may not be planting a church. It may be being an insurance adjuster.
Sure.
And so for them, they may be able to move the kingdom forward as an insurance adjuster, whereas that would have been a harder thing for me to do. And so, so it was just an interesting thing that God was doing there.
The three of us have been around long enough. We've seen people do the opposite too, that they think the only way to move the needle in the kingdom is to be a pastor or a church planter, but that isn't God's call. And yet they just think it is and jump in. So it really is about trying to figure out, what's the Lord called me to do? What's the vocation of life he's called me to do? And then following that. So that's so good.
Oh yeah. I think what we identified within ourselves, and I think that's true for whatever area of ministry you're called into, whether it's, a lay leader or somebody on staff or, something like that, is just, we were in a beautiful state. We lived in the Bozeman, Montana area, just gorgeous. And yet without purpose, we were just so empty. We were like, we can't do this forever. And it really put that into perspective. Like, yes, ministry is hard. Yes, it, will be painful and cost you a lot, but it's so empty outside of it. And you just can't sit around for too long before, we got to get back in the game. We have to.
This summer, Vineyard USA is hosting our national conference, Seed and Soil, in 2 locations, Denver, Colorado on June 17th through 20th, and Cincinnati, Ohio on July 15th through 18th. We hope that by offering 2 locations and dates, everyone, pastors, leaders, volunteers, even those just curious about the Vineyard, everyone will be able to find a time to join us. The conference will have specific programming for adults, youth, and kids, while we focus on cultivating healthy soil in our hearts and planting seeds for the future for all that God wants to do in us and in the Vineyard. Registration is now open with early bird pricing, so make sure to check out vineyardusa.org to learn more and register today.
There was one other nugget, and then I want to keep going with the story, but one other nugget you said, Jennica, that stood out to me is, and it doesn't always turn out this way. I mean, the Lord calls us to do whatever. But you said we sensed the call, and on the second call, the second time of planting, you decided to do some prep work. And so you mentioned one prep work is like, we're going to, get rid of debt. We're going to work on our finances. We're going to be financially prepared. That doesn't mean you came to Goshen with $250,000 in the bank or anything. It just means you didn't have the burden of debt holding you back. And
absolutely.
So that was good. And I'm assuming too, you did some prep work just on how to be a planter. What's it mean to be a planter and that kind of thing. So I think that's just, I wanted to point that out for people who are listening, who are wrestling maybe with a call to ministry or a call to plant, is just watch some of those practical things, whether it's prepping, intellectually or skill-wise or heart-wise. Sometimes the prep is, man, I need to make sure my character is in the right place to be able to go do this thing and to step into leadership. For you all, the prep work was like, man, we want to cut down our debt so we don't have this hanging over us when we try to go do this thing. So I just want to point that out for people who are listening. So 10 years.
That prep season is so important because once the church plant gets going, you don't really have time to do a lot of I remember thinking, man, I wish I would have known which books to read ahead of time because I don't feel like I have time to do, some of that now while you're working and planting. And so you have that prep time where you feel that thing stirring in your spirit or brewing is so important. Like it's such a precious time to use to really prepare yourself the best you can.
And you don't have time and the pressure of doing it.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, because you still got to have a job and earn some money. You're raising kids. Your team, if you have a team, depending on how you parachute in and do a thing, they're thin, no matter what the team is. So it's all falling on you two. And so if there's any gaps, whether in integrity, knowledge, skill set, all of that gets exposed. Yeah. So you're right. Whatever you can do on the front end before you land on the ground, all the better. So
yeah.
So you land 10 years ago, sounds like. And if I got the time right.
This summer will be 10 years. Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
And so just tell us a little bit about the last 10 years. So you people keep bugging you at coffee shops saying you should plant a church, and it speeds your timeline up, and your sending pastor, God bless him or her, they're like, go for it. This is great. And so that's awesome. And so you land, and just give us a quick overview of kind of the last 8 to 10 years.
Yeah. So we, started the church like a lot of, church plants. We started it in our house, and it, started a small group just meeting in our house. We started barbecues. That was kind of our secret weapon, was we would gather people over good food. Yeah. And so, we did that. And then, we went through a lot of the just normal growth things that you go through. So we went from 10 to like 30 people, then to like 50 people. And then we, once we broke that 100 barrier, it was like, wow, we're here. You have kind of a sense of like, oh, we know so much. We knew nothing, and so it's just that process of, just staying faithful. I think, a lot of those processes, a lot of those barriers we faced, it was like anything. You just face it and you walk through it. And sometimes you face it more than once, and sometimes you learn a lot. And then sometimes you make a lot of mistakes, and we made, all the typical mistakes that you probably make, where you go up to that new person and say, oh, you're new here. And then they're like, oh, and then they never come back. And you're like,
I've been here 3 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so we made all those mistakes. And, I think looking back on that now, that really helped form even just a deeper level of character that, there was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, the ugly created, scars that we've had to heal from, but it's allowed us to do some really great things on the back end. And the good has, been beautiful. And the stuff in between has been both formative, but also has just allowed us to stay humble, honestly, through the process. And so, we walked through that. We grew past 100. We continued on from there, but we've also done the whole building thing, where we bought our first building and then outgrew that and had to figure out a second building, which is a whole nother project. And so we bought this like warehouse building that was, it had been emptied out. And then we did a massive, building campaign and build out project. And that's kind of where we're at now. But
we got to do that during COVID.
Yeah. During COVID. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's a beautiful place.
Yeah. That was both helpful and challenging.
Yeah. Why was it helpful? Was it just because you had space and time because not gathering?
Yeah. Well, that, and actually the contractor got our building, you never hear this, they got our building done early.
Great.
But the reason they got it done early was because they couldn't do any of the residential jobs. They could only do their commercial jobs because nobody would let them in their house. And so with our building, they all congregated at our building and got it done.
Nice.
So that was nice.
But it was a little terrifying going in. We'd had to go to 3 services for a while as we were leading up to getting into the new building. And then, COVID hit, and there was kind of that feeling of, oh my goodness, is anybody going to be there to fill up this space? And really, like the space is the result of a million little miracles and big miracles that God did along the way. Just, you're 2 hooligans that don't have a clue how to raise funds for a building, or how does God do this? And it was so many miracles.
Yeah, so many people that put their fingerprints on it too. I think that was kind of a beautiful part of that process, was how many people lent suggestions or showed up to work or brought food to the contractors. I mean, there were so many people that just got involved in 1,000 little ways and big ways to make it happen. So that was pretty neat.
What was, obviously that building and those kind of things, that's a challenge. Now you're post-COVID. What's kind of been the big challenge the last 3.5 years, 4 years? What's been the challenge in ministry you've been facing?
Yeah. I think the biggest one that we've noticed is how to engage people's hearts at a deeper level, because I think what COVID revealed to probably all of us is how much of a need for discipleship there was. And as we walked through COVID, we realized, oh, wow, there are a lot of people that we thought we had gone, deep into some spiritual things with, but they weren't as deep as we thought. And so that revealed a lot of things for, I think, all of us. And so coming out of COVID, I think it's been really good for us to take a look at that and say, okay, there's a lot of things that still work. What are they? And instead of saying, oh, nothing works the same as it used to, I think we could use that as an excuse. Pretty easy to not do anything. But it's our responsibility to figure something out and partner with the Holy Spirit in that process. And so I think that's been kind of our goal is just, okay, Lord, show us where to put our feet because you are doing some things. What are those things? And, it has to do a lot with people engaging in discipleship type activity. And then that moving beyond just us discipling them, but then discipling others. And I think that's where not only are we putting some of our energy, we're trying to figure it out. And I don't think we've got it figured out, but we're taking a stab at it.
Wow. So
how about you, Jennica?
Yeah, I think when we kind of hit that season, 2020, 2021, into early kind of 2022 was just a prolonged season of like what felt like nonstop gut punches and just a lot of, we had kind of hit a point getting ready to move into the building where that often will create a lot of transitions for people that, maybe were part of dreaming about it with you, but then once they get there, everything feels different. And, it just brings up that uncomfortability inside of them. And it's hard to recognize maybe, oh, this is just, it's maybe just not right for me to be here anymore. But instead, they'll kind of fixate on one thing or another that they're unhappy with. And it's all different things. So anyways, there was a lot of leadership transition that happened in that season, a lot of what felt like to us personally, just really painful losses. And I think what's been really beautiful is it feels like over the last year, we've experienced not just a rebuilding, but like now we're building towards something new. It's not, we're not just like rebuilding, but like the Lord is doing a new thing and we're moving forward and we're seeing the Lord's faithfulness on the other side. I've joked with some of our leaders that stuck with us during that really hard season. And I if you stayed with us in that season, it was because you knew the Lord wanted you there and you were really committed because it wasn't super fun for a lot of us. There was a lot of shaking, a lot of bumps, a lot of, new people leading in positions and then, maybe not as smooth. And so I think every church experiences that. We had a interesting scenario where Trav mentioned we were kind of like ready, shoot, aim. When we planted, we were very emotionally prepared from helping with church plants out in Montana for the first 2 years to be grueling and very little growth and just you stick with it and you try to stay encouraged. And ironically, that didn't end up being our scenario at all. It went very quickly. And so we were learning the one I want to say that like the growth kind of was outpacing our learning and leadership and a lot of it. And so God had a lot of grace for us, but I think we kind of had some delayed bumps because of that. When you're building structures really quickly, you're, employing leaders really quickly because that is who, God's given you and you're all doing the best you can to learn and grow at the same time. But I think there was some delayed growing pains that we experienced during that season. And one thing that was so significant, Trav was talking about discipleship. I think it was at the Multiply conference that we met at, Joel. We were sitting in this small group. This was before Jay was the national director, Jay Pathick, and he was sitting around with this, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 people talking about discipleship. And he said something that, honest to goodness, truly did change my life. He said, in ministry, because organizations grow and you find yourself doing more and more leading leaders and spending your time on that, and you get farther and farther away from sitting with people and actually like making disciples of Jesus. And there is a hollowness you'll start to experience
Yeah.
when you get too far from discipleship.
Yep.
That is supposed to be there because we're all called to make disciples at all seasons of our life.
Yeah.
Like that's the mandate for all of us. It's a call for all of us. And I can't remember when that was, maybe early 2020, I think.
Yeah.
And honest to goodness, that was like the lifeblood for me. I took it really seriously, and both Trav and I did, and said we have to keep making disciples. And getting to walk with people and seeing like the light bulb come on in their eyes with Jesus, seeing them turn from sin in their life and turn to Jesus, seeing those darkness to light stories. That was the thing that sustained me when everything else felt like it was just in shambles at times. It forced you to see in another person in a close proximity, no, God is doing something, and this is worth the effort, and I'll keep doing this forever if I get to keep seeing this happen in people's lives.
Wow.
Yeah, it's changed us.
That is so good, man. Those last few minutes from both of you, there's some gold nuggets in there that you both shared. So I appreciate that. I know that folks are going to chew on some of those words. I think there's a couple things I'd love to do in that time that we have. I'd put kind of a pin in one thing in my thinking early on, Jennica, when you were sharing. And so early on, you shared about just getting over the hurdle of being a woman who's a leader and that. And could you just, I would just take a few moments and I would just love to hear, like, so are you pastoring the church now, or do you consider yourself a pastor? And I know the answer to this, but I'd love for you to just to share on that for people who are listening, and maybe just a nugget or two on how you came to the point that mentally and emotionally you're good with being called a pastor and being a leader. Could you just share a bit on that?
Yeah. So I think when we first planted, I had navigated it enough to feel like I did believe women could be pastors, but I wasn't convinced that I needed to do it. And I honestly just felt like, well, if I can do the same stuff and just not call it that and not have to face the battles, then it's just not worth it to me.
Sign me up.
I don't care that much about a title.
Yeah.
And so what actually happened was probably almost close to 2 years ago now, was it, honey? That Travis came to me and asked me, I'd been on staff and I'd been a director for a while at the church, but I have probably more of a shepherd gifting and Travis has more of a leadership gifting and more of a vision gifting. And so he said, I really feel like we're at the space as a church where we need another pastor that has a stronger shepherd gifting. And so I'd really like you to consider that, officially, but either we're going to move on or we're going to do this thing. And to be quite honest, because we had gone through a couple years straight of hard, I was really trepidatious about it because I'm like, I just don't want to make anybody leave that doesn't need to leave.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't want to cause any more upsets that aren't necessary, but I spoke with some women pastors and kind of sought counsel, and they reminded me that was probably fear wasn't the best decision maker
right.
in that process, and really God was creating a clear invitation, and if that would allow for any girls or women in our church that had, if they did what I did when I was 12 and said, Lord, I'll do anything for you. If that picture can truly be anything in their mind and not like barriers on what that looks like, not boxes of what that looks like, I want to do that for them. And it's only going to be hard, really, that first person. And so if I can kind of take that and then it's just established in the church, I don't want there to be any barriers in their mind. If they want to, if they feel like God's asking them to do something, I want it to look like whatever it is that God's asking them to do. And honestly, the Lord prepared the way. Trav did a lot of good hard work, I feel like, with our church theologically.
Yep.
And I was fully prepared that some people would probably leave the church. But so far, it was back in December, we ordained me. And everyone's still with us, which is like, it feels like a miracle in and of itself, especially being in a pretty conservative Midwest community.
Yeah.
It's been beautiful. Yeah.
I saw the pictures you all posted when Jennica, when you were ordained. It was so cool to see that and happening.
Oh, so special.
And you guys got something going on in Northeast Indiana because you got several ordained women pastors up there, and so it's really neat to watch that taking place from afar and just to see really good, godly, called, talented women pastors being raised up and released to lead, and it's really cool to see.
My sister, who her and her husband, they helped us plant the church. She's actually a Vineyard pastor now at Warsaw, and that was the other church that got planted from our sending church, long before. And so, it was an unexpected journey for both of us.
So good, so good. Well, you've turned the corner. You've kind of come through the post-COVID. You've made some big decisions on discipleship and how you're going to lead. Travis, you had the wherewithal to even see that if your strength is kind of that leadership gifting and that you needed more somebody with a pastoral gifting also in a pastor chair. And so, Jennica, you said yes to that call. And so you've turned this corner. And then really what I've been hearing, again, from afar, I'm in Ohio, I'm one state away, but hearing just some great fruit and the Lord doing some cool things over the last few months and over the last year. So I'd just love to hear some of the cool stories that have been happening in the life of your church.
Yeah. So we've had a number of really cool things happen in the last couple of years, but I think since we made some of those discipleship shifts around the COVID time period, we've actually seen more people come to Jesus in those years than any years we've been a church. So that's been significant. But through that process, I think what has been really exciting for me personally is I always thought it was great if I got to lead some people to Jesus, but what was even cooler is if that went beyond me and some of the people in our church were actually doing that too.
Amen.
And so that's been significant because, when you start something, that doesn't always happen right away. But the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of that. And actually, one of the cool stories is recently we got to baptize 15 people on our Sunday, which was really fun. But what was even cooler than that was kind of the stories that led up to the baptism, because it really just started with like one person giving their life to Jesus. And then that one person invited like some family members, and then they came to church. And then like one or two of them gave their life to Jesus. And then pretty soon, like a couple more did. And then they were like, hey, we should invite our friends. And Jennica actually has some other pieces to that story. I'll let her kind of share that. But getting to see that kind of roll into affecting whole families has been just an incredible, incredible thing. So,
yeah, that was kind of a pinnacle moment. So there's a couple in our church that carry a lot of leadership, and back probably close to 2 years ago, they had gotten a prophetic word that there was some people in their life that they had been praying long-term for to come to Jesus, and were maybe growing a little weary and like, Lord, is it ever going to happen? And they just were encouraged, like, it's going to happen. Keep pressing into that. And I remember talking to them that night, and they said, that's our children. Like, none of our children are following Jesus. And they'd come to Jesus later in life. And so now all their kids were grown, but, they longed for them to experience that with them. So I think it was on a Mother's Day, all the kids had come like as a surprise. And one of them, who would self-proclaim say, I was probably the least likely to come to Jesus.
Right.
The last person any of them were expecting gave his life to Jesus. Their family started coming. And then, like Travis said, some more of the siblings started coming, and they started inviting friends. So this baptism was so, so significant and special, because there was literally all these like streams and webs between the God activity that had happened, and multiple of them just completely new to church, new to Jesus, and have been just, their lives are changing incredibly. And now, where there's just used to be one couple, there's literally 2 or 3 rows of people, all connected and coming to church together and following Jesus. And man, like, those are the moments where you go, okay, I'm in forever, Lord. You got me. I'll do this forever.
You can put up with a lot of bad days when you get one of those.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what I'm hearing there is, you made a switch to thinking through discipleship. So it's not just on the pastor to lead people to Jesus, but you're discipling people who then are being discipled into sharing their story and praying for the lost. And one couple catches that idea. They catch it for their own family, for their kids. They invite. You guys obviously understand the importance of special days that, like Mother's Day, or I think of like Christmas Eve's another one, because there's families going to be there. You share the gospel. You make that a regular part of those days. Somebody who self-proclaimed says, I would have been the last person to do this. They do it, and then they begin inviting, and it just keeps replicating itself to now you have 2 to 3 rows of transformed lives. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
What's that done to your church? Just that story, just the one, a couple goes to 2 or 3 rows, 15 people get baptized. Like, I'm assuming that kind of enthusiasm or that the joy, or it impacts the rest of the body too, not just that family.
Yeah, it really does. I think it's encouraged a lot of people to step out and just make an invite. I think that's been a huge part of it. But actually, I was just hearing a story from one of our staff members the other day that was telling me how, it's felt like unfair that these people are inviting people and they're giving their life to Jesus. And so I want to start doing that too.
Right. I want some of that.
Yeah. So that was kind of cool to hear. And so I think that's what it's doing, is it's sparking just the idea that, hey, this is for all of us. It's not just for a few. And so we should all be doing this in whatever way we can. And that becomes contagious, and it really does spread like wildfire. And so I'm excited to see, what next year looks like, because I think this is fruit that's coming from years of doing things and making a lot of mistakes and then trying to figure it out. And so if I could encourage anybody, I would just say, man, if God has invited you into something, don't give up on that thing and just keep pressing it. Because even when it gets hard, even when it gets challenging, even when it feels like something's not showing up the way that it should, man, keep going. Because if you're doing the thing that God's invited you to do, you're going to eventually get to that point, and it's going to be fruitful. And so that's what we're getting to experience, and it's pretty neat.
So good. And that is, as we kind of wrap up here, that's the thread I see through both of your stories, is that there's an invitation. You received invitations at 11 and 12 years old. You receive invitations when you're 18 and 23, you enter into marriage, but you also receive an invitation to then go and be a part of ministry and intern, church plant, and you receive another invitation after doing that for a while in Montana, and you're invited to come back to Jennica's home state of Indiana. And over again, there's been these invitations. There's been this invitation to look at church differently and to focus on discipleship. Now you've said yes every step of the way, and now that's beginning. All those invitations in your life that have piled up that you've said yes, it's gotten contagious, and now other people are inviting others into this life with Jesus. And man, that is so good to see and so encouraging to me. I appreciate you two just sharing your story and being willing to share with others. It's going to be inspirational to people.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, so good.
It's a joy to get to be part of this Vineyard family.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, thank you all. Thank you for being Vineyard pastors. Thank you. I know we didn't talk at all about this, except maybe I referenced it in the beginning, but you also give to your area leaders, so that you end up pastoring the pastors in your area, and you give time to that. So I thank you that you're not just focused on Goshen, Indiana, but the greater Vineyard family and just the pastors around you. And you guys have such a great area, such great camaraderie, and you've done a great job of pastoring them, and they're good people.
They're good people. Yeah.
Well, hey, we will, see you, I'm sure, at some upcoming national conference or something. So thanks for your time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you all soon. See ya.
Yeah.
Take care.
See ya.
As we celebrate our 50-year anniversary in the Vineyard, if you're interested in learning more about Vineyard history, there are plenty of resources for you. Check out our show notes for links to books, YouTube videos, and more to learn about Vineyard history and identity. And make sure to keep listening to the podcast this year for stories of Vineyard churches throughout the year.